Hey students, it's me, your teacher Amber, and welcome back to your subject GE111 or Understanding the Self. So today we're going to be discussing these topics. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoy the learning process. Okay, so with our last virtual lecture and also from our prelims, we discussed the different philosophers who were involved in shaping the ideas and beliefs about the self. Now, in our next unit, or the midterms, we're going to be talking about the self, society, and culture. Now, the lesson objectives are the following. So at the end of our lesson, hopefully you guys are going to be able to explain the relationship between and among the self, society, and culture, describe and discuss the different ways by which society and culture shape the self, compare and contrast how the self can be influenced by different institutions and society, and of course, you're going to be able to examine oneself against the different views of the self and that were discussed in the class. Okay, so the self, society, and culture. Now, we're going to talk about what is the self, but across time and history, the self has been debated, discussed, and fruitfully or otherwise conceptualized by different thinkers and philosophy. That's why we talked about it noong ating prelims. Now, eventually, with the advent of social sciences, it became possible for new ways and paradigms to re-examine the true nature of the self. Ano ba talagang self? Now, people put a halt on speculative debates. Hindi na puro speculation on the relationship between body and soul, eventually renamed body and the mind. Thinkers just eventually got tired of focusing on the long-standing debate since 6th century BC between the relationship of these two components of the human person. So thinkers just settled on the idea that there were only two components of the human person, and whatever relationship these two have is less important than the fact that there is a self, no? The debate shifted into another locus of discussion. Given new ways of knowing and the growth of social sciences, it became possible for new approaches to the examination of the self to come to the fore, or sa pinakaunahan. One of the loci of, if not the most important axis of analysis in the relationship between the self and the external world, no? What is the relationship between external reality and the self anyway? So in the famous, di ba, yung Tarzan, I think some of you have watched this, and this is a Disney film, and doon sa film na yon is si Tarzan was left in the middle of the forest, no? Kasi di ba yung parents niya was caught in an accident. I think boat accident ba yun or aircraft, I forgot. But anyway, dun sa story ni Tarzan growing up, he never had an interaction, 'di ba, with any other human being but apes and other animals. So lumaki siya, pinalaki siya ng mga kahayup-hayupan, 'di ba? So Tarzan grew up acting strangely like apes, unlike human persons. So Tarzan became an animal. In effect, his sole interaction with them made him just like one of them, diba? Disappointedly, human persons will not develop as human persons without intervention. This story, which was supposed to be based on real life, challenges the long-standing notion of human persons being special and being a particular kind of being in the spectrum of living entities. After all, ourselves are not special because of the soul infused into us. We may be gifted with intellect and the capacity to rationalize things, but at the end of the day, our growth and development and consequentially, ourselves are truly products of our interaction with the external reality. So how much of you are essential, no? How much of who you are now is a product of your society, community, and family? Has your choice of school affected yourself now? Had you been born into a different family and schooled in a different college, how much of who you are now would change, no? This is the reason why we are going to discuss the self, society, and culture. Kasi nga, who we are is not predetermined, no? Meron tayong tinatawag na nurture versus nature. Now, ako, ikaw, whatever we become in our lives is a product of those who are around us, no? Yung society natin, yung culture natin. Gaya nga ng story ni Tarzan, lumaki siya na para siyang lesser lesser species. Hindi siya parang tao. Why? Because yun yung surrounding niya. Yun yung kinalakihan niya na parang para lang din siyang hayop. Wala namang nagtuturo sa kanya how to speak. However, these animals have different intelligences. So we should not discriminate anyone or anything at all, because everyone in this world, in this little blue rock floating in space, is special. We have our own function in our world. So, yun nga lang, magkakaiba tayo. So, what we're trying to define here is yourself based on your influences. Okay? So, what is the self? The self in contemporary literature, no, and even common sense is commonly defined by the following characteristics: yung separate, yung separate and self-contained, yung independent, yung consistent and unitary, and then yung private. That's according to Stevens, 1996. So by separate, it is meant that the self is distinct from other selves, no? The self is always unique and has its own identity. One cannot be another person. Like I've said, diba, noong ating prelims, one philosopher expressed the uniqueness of who we are, and I gave an example na hindi tayo kagaya ng robots na makakopy lang. We are all unique in our own ways, no? So, even twins are distinct from each other, diba? So, kahit na magkamukha kayo, kahit may kamukha ka, kahit may kapareho ka ng kung ano-ano, there's always something different. Even yung soulmates nyo, yung mga mahal nyo sa buhay, di ba sinasabi nyo minsan, we're so compatible, we're so much alike. But then again, meron pa rin kayo niyang pagkakaiba because everybody is built differently, everybody is raised differently. Okay? So, let's go to the second. Self is also self-contained and independent because in itself, it can exist. Its distinctness allows it to be self-contained and its own thoughts, characteristics, and volition. It does not require any other self for it to exist. It is consistent also because it has a personality that is enduring and therefore can be expected to persist for quite some time. Its consistency allows it to be studied, described, and measured. Consistency also means that a particular self-trait, traits, characteristics, tendencies, and potentialities are more or less the same. Self is unitary in that it is the center of all experiences and thoughts that run through a certain person, no? It is like the chief command post in an individual where all processes, emotions, and thoughts converge. Finally, the self is private. Each person sorts out information, feelings, and emotions and thought processes within the self. This whole process is never accessible to anyone but the self. O, diba? So, when we say self-contained, ito yung tayo lang ang process ng ating. We are isolated to ourselves unless we share ourselves to others, diba? Yung mga thoughts natin, would it be weird if someone can just look at you and then they would read your thoughts, or baka yung thoughts mo nagiging projector na pala sa likod ng ulo mo, diba? It's so weird if that's the case. That's why self-contained lang tayo, because our thoughts do not do that. It doesn't project itself to other people. Okay? So, when we say naman independent, because most of the time, we do the thinking ourselves. We do a lot of things by ourselves, no? And that's how we go through our day-to-day. And most of the time, we need help from others. But most importantly, we are independent talaga. Kasi most of us are raised that way. We were, lalo na dito sa Pilipinas, we were raised to be our own hero. Diba? Wala tayo halos maasahan kundi yung mga sarili natin. Okay? When you say consistent naman, it is yung, kumbaga yung paulit-ulit mo. Ito yung common na lumalabas na personality mo. Or this is the common things that appear about yourself. Like, kunwari, some of your classmates describe yourselves, di ba, nung orientation natin, meron tayong, why are you named like that? Kasi ganito po, my name came from ganito, kasiyahan because we're so happy, ganyan-ganyan. There are so many things consistent about you, and those things that are consistent follow the consistency that is able to be examined by others, no? Di ba, kunwari, pero it's not always the case, di ba? Kasi minsan meron tayong pinapakitang sides natin na inconsistent to who we are inside. Meron nga, di ba, sinasabi nila, I'm happy, mukha siyang masaya, patawa siya sa classroom nila, or patawa siya sa friends niya, but really, the person is going through something. Dinadaan niya na lang sa pagpapatawa because gusto niyang ma-escape yung reality niya na hindi pala talaga siya masaya and marami siyang problems. So there are so many things that affect the consistency of ourselves, pero who we are inside is the definition of consistency. Kayo lang mismo ang makakaalam kung anong consistent sa inyo. But it is available for description, studies, and measured. Once you share it naman, of course, to others. When you go to your unitary, meaning unified self ka. You are a unified self. There are cases that some people experience a not unitary self. Kumbaga marami silang alter egos or characters sa sarili nila. I don't know if you're familiar with the Dr. Hyde and Jekyll. So, isang tao lang siya pero dalawang tao siya sa loob ng katawan niya, and this is a form of mental illness, di ba? Merong mental illness na dalawang tao ka sa isang katawan because you don't know who you are exactly, or this is a form of psychosis pag wala na yung proper control sa pag-iisip. So, this is subject to a more deeper conversation, but when you say unitary, kumbaga, iisa ka lang. There's only one you. There's only one person inside you that you identify and you call yourself, di ba? Then when you go to private, of course, private ka. You can keep things to yourself. That's the meaning of privacy. No? So that is the self, according to Stevens again in 1996. So, yun na nga, the self is consistent because one's personality is enduring. It lasts and persistent for a long time. One's particular characteristics, traits, tendencies, and potentialities are more or less the same. Another characteristics of the self is being unitary, as we discussed. Diba? So, private suggests that ito na yon. This is the self itself. Okay? So, let's go to the self and culture. Okay? So, before I keep on discussing this, I hope most of you are getting the idea that the self is a complicated discussion. However, we are just trying to understand who you are by means of discussing these topics, no? Because this is why you are at school. You need to study things in a uniform way, okay? So, social constructivists, by the way, argue that the self should not be seen as a static entity that stays constant through and through. Kasi we talked about consistency, but however, di ba nga napag-usap-usapan natin during yung first recitation natin, sinabi ko na yourself is subject to change depending on the experience that you are going to experience or go through. So, yun na nga. Rather, the self has to be seen as something that is in unceasing flux, no? In a constant struggle with external reality, and it's malleable in its dealings with society. The self is always in participation with social life and its identity subjected to influences here and there. Having these perspectives considered should draw one into concluding that the self is truly multifaceted. Okay, so when we say multifaceted, maraming facets ang pagkatao mo. Okay? So, consider a boy named sabihin na lang nating si John. Okay, si John is a math professor at a Catholic university for more than a decade now. Sabihin na lang natin. Tapos si John has a beautiful wife whom he met in college, si Joanne. Sabihin na lang natin Joanne. So si Joanne, or Joan, that's how they say it in American language, si Joan was John's first and last girlfriend. Apart from being a husband, John is also blessed with 2 doting kids, a son and a daughter. He also sometimes serves in the church too as a lector and a commentator. As a man of different roles, one can expect John to change and adjust his behaviors, ways, and even language depending on the social situation. When John is in the university, he conducts himself as a matter that befits his title as a professor. As a husband, John can be intimate and touchy. John considers him sweet, something that his students will never conceive him to be. His kids fear him. As a father, John can be stern. As a lector and commentator, on the other hand, his churchmates knew him as a guy who is calm, all smiles, and always ready to lend a helping hand to anyone. This short story is not new to most of us. We ourselves play different roles, act in different ways depending on our circumstances. Are we being hypocritical pag ginagawa natin yon? Are we even conscious of our shifting selves? According to what we have so far, this is not only normal, but it is also acceptable and accepted. The self is capable of morphing and fitting itself into different circumstances it finds itself in. Okay, so ano bang ibig sabihin ng story na yon? I think some of you have gotten it, but I'm just gonna give another example. Kayo mismo as students, you act differently at home, you act differently in front of your friends. I know you would know this because I myself am like that. Lalong-lalo na with, of course, my professional endeavors. When I talk to my clients about art, I try to sound professional. When I talk to you students as your instructor, I try to fit my language depending on how I would get your attention, because mahirap, one difficult thing for an instructor to do is to get your attention to listen to our topic. So I know I have to be professional, but at the same time I have to sound like I'm trying to be an entertainer to you guys. Kasi yun na nga, that's one of the reasons why I chose to be an educator. Is because I also not just want to entertain and also to educate students, but I also want to connect with students in a way that I would inspire you. So, iba kasi kasi like me, during my college days, it was hard for me to show different versions of myself before. Kasi, not that I don't have the energy, but I was also not sure of what version of myself should I show to people, because I was scared na I was being pretentious, ganyan. But as I've said, and also galing sa libro natin, it is acceptable na binabago-bago natin yung sarili natin. Depende kung sino yung kaharap natin. Kasi situational ang mga bagay-bagay. Alam namang consistent ka palagi, but then you miss the point of being able to be professional or be friendly or be your true self. Kasi meron tayong true self, di ba? So what I'm trying to say here is, sabi ko nga in our first class, yung tinanong-tanong ko kayo tungkol sa names and all, we change. And changes are not bad, okay? Changes are not bad, and hindi kayo plastic. You are not plastic because you are changing yourself on different audiences. Okay? It is not a form of being a false version of yourself when you're trying to edit yourself depending on your situation. It's just that sometimes it requires you to do so because it would benefit you. No? It would benefit the self to do that. Alam nga namang yung si John, yung college professor, ay maging sweet at maging loving din sa kanyang students, maging intimate and touchy din na kasuhan na siya. 'Di ba? Yung ugali niya kay Joan sa asawa niya is reserved for Joan. Yung ugali niya for his kids is reserved for his kids. Yung ugali niya for his churchmates is reserved for his churchmates because hindi nga pwedeng super consistent ka, mababaliw ka niyan, okay? So let's move forward to the self and culture. Okay, so remaining the same person and turning chameleon by adapting to one's context seems paradoxical, di ba? However, the French anthropologist Marcel Mauss has an explanation for this phenomenon. According to Mauss, every self has two faces. O, dalawa daw ang mukha natin. So, we have the person and the moi. So, moi refers to a person's sense of who he is, his body, and his basic identity, his biological givenness. Moi is a person's basic identity. Person, on the other hand, is composed of social concepts of what it means to be who he is. Person has much to do with what it means to live in a particular institution, a particular family, a particular religion, a particular nationality, and how to behave given expectations and influences from others. So, your moi is kung anong pagkakakilala mo mismo sa sarili mo. Your person is how you are supposed to act. Diba? Let's say for me, ako ay isang transgender woman, I'm expected to act like a hyper-feminine version of myself. Dapat babaihan lang and all. Hindi pwedeng magsiga-siga or whatever kasi masisira yung idea ng pagiging babae. But, in my true self, I know, I identify as female, pero there are actions that I do that are not considered for females. Mahilig ako magbuhat ng mabibigat na bagay, mahilig ako mag-exercise, mahilig ako yung parang mga pambarakong gawain. Why? Because I do not want to limit myself into gender roles. Kasi, as long as I have 2 legs, 2 hands, and I have my head, and as long as I'm capable of doing something, gagawin ko talaga siya. Regardless of what is assigned to me by my person. No? I am always focused on my moi. So again, that would depend, no? Kasi some of us are restricted by how we should live. Some parents have expectations of how we, yan na nga, yung parents, yung influence ng parents nyo is pwede siyang ilagay sa person. Pero yung moi is how you really know who you are. Okay? So I have friends, sabi nila, I can't be like you because my parents can't do that. Or, you know, whatever your choice, whatever your identity is, just make sure na kilala nyo talaga yung sarili nyo, regardless of how you are supposed to act or how are you supposed to behave, as said in the mode of person. Okay? In the story na sinabi ko, yung kay John, might have a moi, but certainly he has to shift person from time to time to adapt to his social situation. So yun na nga, yung person yung gumagalaw if paiba-iba yung kumbaga ugali natin or yung pag-asta natin in our audiences or in the people who we surround ourselves with. So, however, at some point he has to sport his stern professional look. Another day he has to be doting and strict father inside the bedroom. He can play goofy with his wife. In all this and more, John retains who he is, his being John, his moi. That part of him is stable and static all throughout. So siya lang yung nakakaalam probably, or his wife probably knows him, but once again, tayo lang mostly ang nakakaalam ng pagkatao natin. This dynamics and capacity for different person can be illustrated better cross-culturally. An overseas Filipino worker, OFW, adjusting life to another country is a very good case study. In the Philippines, many people unabashedly violate jaywalking rules, diba? A common Filipino treats road, even national ones, as basically his, and so he was just merely crosses whenever and wherever. When the same Filipino visits another country with strict traffic rules, let's say sa Singapore, you will notice how suddenly law-abiding the said Filipino becomes. A lot of Filipinos has anecdotally confirmed this observation. Yun na nga, kasi ang ating self just adjust itself kung saan tayong lugar, anong culture. Yung culture natin dito sa Philippines is, 'di ba? Lakad lang, kahit masagasaan. O, di ba? Pag pumunta ka sa ibang bansa, sabihin nga natin sa Singapore or other countries na strict yung kanilang traffic rules, ay huli ka. Wala ka nang kawala. Kaya, nagiging mas disciplined ka sa ibang bansa because it's also a different land. You are unfamiliar of so many things. That's why you will fear. Pero pag nasa lugar ka na halos wala kang fear or you are secure, o di ba, feeling mo pag-aari mo na yung lugar-lugar. Kasi nga, you are secure, you feel secure because this is your home. This is where you live. Ito na yung lugar na para sa iyo. So you are most confident and most eligible to violate rules. Kumbaga. No, not really. But yeah, that's one of the examples. Let's go to I'll give you another example before I proceed, no? In the Philippines, no, Filipinos tend to consider their territory as part of who they are. This includes considering their immediate surrounding as part of them. Kaya nga meron tayong yung tapat ko, linis ko, di ba? Filipinos most probably do not consider national roads as something external to who they are. It is part of who we are. Okay? Language is another interesting aspect of the social constructivism. The Filipino language is incredibly interesting to talk about. The way by which we articulate our love is denoted by the phrase, mahal kita. This, of course, is the Filipino translation of I love you. The Filipino brand of its articulation of love, unlike English, does not specify the subject and the object of the love. There is no specification of who loves who and who is loved. There is simply a word for love, mahal, and the pronoun kita, which is a second-person pronoun which refers to the speaker and the one being talked to. In Filipino language, unlike English, there is no distinction between the lover and the beloved. They are one. Okay? So, yun yung isang example natin dyan. Okay? So, the self in families. Another institution which has greater impact on the interplay between the self and the social world is the family. So the most important unit for social development in children is their family. Okay? Since family members are among the first people with whom children communicate, their attitude has the greatest influence on the child's social behavior. Growing up in large families, therefore, provides an added advantage. It invites acts of sharing and caring for the little ones. Having a sibling is also helpful in that case. The child, therefore, grows up to be jolly with traits like kindness, affection, and compassion towards others. Kasi nga, human persons, we learn the ways of living and therefore selfhood by being in a family. Tama ba? Kasi it is what family initiates a person to become that serves as the basis for the person's progress. Kasi like babies internalize ways and styles that they observe from their family. That's why madali daw makasubad it mga bata, di ba? By imitating, for example, the language of its primary agents of rearing its family. Babies learn the language. The same is true for ways as well as the converse if raised in a converse family. Okay, what I'm trying to say here is, kumbaga, if you grow up in a family na showy, what does showy mean? You are not afraid to show affection. You are not afraid to give hugs, kisses, and like talk about your emotions. Basically, you will grow up na kumbaga, ikaw ay open to discussing your ideas and yourself and how you express your love and things like that to other people. When you grow up in a family naman na parang walang usap-usap, walang hanggang tinginan, hanggang strict na walang halos kwentuhan, di ba? There are families like that. Especially those families who are large, di ba? Halos hindi na magkausap-usap because there's just so many, di ba? Okay, so yun na nga, without a family, biologically and sociologically, a person may not even survive or become a human person. So, let's go back to Tarzan, di ba? In more ways than one, the survival of Tarzan in the midst of the forest is already a miracle. His being a fully human person with a sense of selfhood is a different story though, di ba? The usual teleserye plot of kids getting swapped in the hospital and getting reared by a different family gives an obvious manifestation of the point being made in this section. One is who he is because of his family for the most part. Ayan na nga. So, kung kunwari, galing kayo sa pamilyang matapobre, may possibility na maging matapobre ka paglaki mo. If you come from a family na marunong kayong maging generous sa ibang tao, most probably, mapagbigay kapag ka lumaki ka. You know? So, usually, you pattern yourselves depending on how you were raised. Kuha ba, students? So, yun na nga. Let's move forward to gender and the self, okay? So gender is one of the loci of the self that is subject to alteration, change, or development. Over the years, people had been in constant struggle to fight for the right to express, validate, and assert their gender expression. Oftentimes, society forces a particular identity unto us depending on our sex and or gender. In the Philippines, husband, the so-called head of the family, is expected to provide for his family while his wife or mother takes the role of taking care of the children. Social factors which may influence gender identity include ideas regarding gender roles conveyed by family, authority figures, mass media, and other influential people in a child's life. When children are raised by individuals who adhere to stringent gender roles, they are more likely to behave in the same way, matching their gender identity with the corresponding stereotypical gender pattern. So, ayun pa rin, magkakakonect pa rin yung discussion natin. Kung ano tinuro sa'yo na gender role ng family mo, ng tatay mo, kailangan maskulado ka lang, kailangan ganito ka lang, siga-siga ka because you are junior. Diba? These are the things that we know that are commonly, stereotypically being taught to us by some of our great influencers, aka our families, our parents, mothers, and fathers, even siblings. Diba? So, another point of view ito siya. I'll just share something. No? According to Sonia Tolstoy, the wife of the famous Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy, wrote when she was 21, I am nothing but a miserable crushed worm, whom no one wants, whom no one loves, a useless creature with morning sickness and a big belly, 2 rotten teeth and a bad temper, a battered sense of dignity and love, which nobody wants and which nearly drives me insane. A few years later, she wrote, it makes me laugh to read over this diary. It's so full of contradictions, and one would think that I was such an unhappy woman, yet there is there a happier woman than I? No? So this account illustrates that our gender partly determines how we see ourselves in the world. Oftentimes, society forces a particular identity onto us depending on our sex and gender, as I've said. So, the eldest man in a family, let's say for example, is expected to head the family and hold it in. Slight modifications have been made on the way due to feminism and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender activism, but the most part, patriarchy it's still at work, you guys. So, let's crush the patriarchy, utang na loob, para naman maging free tayong lahat, because I know some of you struggle with this. Palaging ganito, dapat ganong gagawin ko. You can choose for yourself, because yun na nga, merong gender roles. So, yung sinabi ni Sonia Tolstoy, I'll just connect it with myself na lang. I'm the closest example for this. When I was high school, I was severely depressed. No, I was severely depressed, and later on in my life, I was medically diagnosed to have major depression disorder and suicidal ideation. No, and for me, medyo mahirap i-discuss to. Mangiyak-ngiyak na nga siguro ako. Because it was a different period of my life. I was so depressed. And according to one quote that I've read, actually hindi, I think it's from an interview. Sabi nila, depression is yourself rebelling against you because you are lying to who you are. Hindi ka nagpapakatotoo sa sarili mo, kaya ka nade-depress. Yun yung nabasa ko, I think I've read it somewhere. And that really inspired me to change. Because the only reason na made-depress ka is because you're not happy with who you are. So yun nga, yung sinabi ni Sonia Tolstoy, di ba yung description na, katakot-takot yung description niya sa sarili niya. It is the same with me. I love writing sa diaries before, and if I'm looking back right now, medyo naiiyak ako because I really had a different life. I had a different life before. Hindi ganito kalaya. Hindi ako pinagbawalan ng family ko to do whatever I want. Pero I was just so unhappy because I had to be a good kid. I had to be able to make sure na wala akong natatapakan na iba because ayoko yung may gulo, ayoko yung matahimik lang kasi ako kasi like let's say kung classmate nyo ako, usually nasa gilid lang ako ng classroom tapos mahilig ako mag-drawing, magsulat-sulat, ganyan-ganyan. So, it is so far from my life right now because ngayon I'm an openly expressing transgender woman. I am a teacher even. And who would know? And I'm the first transgender teacher dito sa Asia. And I don't even know if the first transgender teacher dito sa Leyte or Tacloban. But the fact that I'm doing this right now is, what I'm trying to say here is I want to inspire you to seek out the reality sa sarili nyo. Because kaya kayo nagsasuffer is because you don't understand yourself. And that's why you are taking this subject. And it's very fitting that it's with me. I know you have other teachers discussing this, but the truth is, you really have to understand yourself because you will suffer if you don't. And part of understanding yourself is knowing what kind of gender role do you want to take in society. I chose to be transgender. Oh, not really. I don't want to use the word chose. I think it was natural for me ever since. Nineglect ko lang siya because takot ako noon na there are so many bad sides also of being who I am. Yung bang iniinsulto ako ng iba, or there are some people who don't respect my identity. No? But then again, this is the life that I chose. And mas happy ako compared to the years na nung nagsusulat ako dun sa diary ko and I was diagnosed with major depression, no? So far, that's one thing that I want to share to you students. You really have to know the truth about yourself by knowing these things, okay? So gender and the self, let's end it there. That's it for this lesson. I hope you guys learned a lot. If you have questions for me, I'm available on Messenger from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday to Friday, right? And of course, I know we're still in a pandemic, so I hope you guys are doing fine. If you have problems or if you want to talk to someone, I'm available on said Messenger. I know it's a little difficult, especially when it gets overwhelming, but I hope you know that we as your teachers are here to support you. If you have questions for us, just don't hesitate to reach out. And that's it for this subject. I hope you guys are still doing fine. Bye-bye.